Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Wilson. I'm the studio director of the Perth Pilates studio in Western Australia and also the founder of Pilates Business Bootcamp. And today I'm going to be answering a question that one of my graduates asked about how much rent she should be paying for a new studio premises that she's looking at taking on. Now, in the Pilates industry, there's a really simple guideline that you can work with. Basically, your combined total rent plus outgoings, which I'll define in a little moment, for the studio space you're looking at working in, should be roughly equal to 10% of your total annual turnover from within that space. So let me go into a bit more detail and kind of explain things further here. If you've only ever been involved with residential leases before, you've only ever rented a home as opposed to a commercial property or a studio space, you won't necessarily be familiar with the concept of outgoings. So outgoings for a property are basically all of the costs for the landlord, the owner of the property, that they incur in owning and operating and maintaining that property. So for example, we could be including things like rates, council rates, water rates, land taxes, building insurance, for example, all of those sorts of costs. Normally, if you're renting a home from someone, a residential property, then the landlord pays those costs and you never need to worry about them. But as a commercial tenant, when you're taking on a space for business purposes, you're actually liable to reimburse the landlord for those costs. So when you're taking on a studio space to rent, you need to take into account both what the asking price is on the rent for the property and also what their estimated outgoings are for that property each year. Combine those two, and those two figures should equal 10% of your total annual turnover. Now, obviously, if you're moving into a new studio space, having just opened up a studio or expanding a studio into a larger space, then you're hoping that your initial turnover might start quite low, but hopefully will grow quite quickly to a much higher level. So what you want to look at is what's your projected turnover once you've got the space up and running and operating, maybe not to full capacity, because we typically don't ever operate with the studio with every single class space completely full. That creates problems because clients can't get into lessons and things like that. But maybe if you're operating at like 75% of your capacity, if you think about how many classes you're planning to run, how many classes you can reasonably get up to that sort of 75% booking rate, what would you estimate you're going to be able to turn over in that space? Aim to pay roughly 10% of what you're estimating you could turn over as your rent. If you're in an existing studio space, then it's worthwhile sort of running that calculation every so often, work out what your rent and outgoings are as a percentage of your current annual turnover. And there are sort of three possible scenarios that could occur here. So first up, you could find that you're running at about that 10% rate in terms of how much rent you're paying, and that would be ideal. That's great. Keep doing what you're doing. In other situations, you might occasionally find that, for example, you're paying a much lower percentage of your turnover as rent. So you might find instead of paying 10% of your total turnover as rent, you're paying just 5% or something like that out as rent and outgoings. And that's fantastic. That's a sign that you're making really good, efficient use of the space that you're in. It may also be an indication that your business has grown to the point where possibly you could look at expanding and going into larger premises if that's something that you're interested in doing, that perhaps you would have some capacity to take on some extra space and grow further. At the other end of the spectrum, of course, there'll be situations where you crunch the numbers and you find out that you're paying way too much on your current rent compared to what you're turning over. So your rent might and outgoings might be like 20% of your total turnover, for example. And the issue that you can run into here is that you then don't have enough money left over to do other really important things like paying your staff or paying all of the other myriad of bills that are involved in successfully operating a studio. So in that situation, you really need to figure out ways to get that rental percentage down. Now, there are two basic ways you can do this. You can either look at increasing your turnover or you can look at reducing your rent. So if you're thinking about reducing rent, I mean, the sorts of things you're looking at is maybe you should be moving to downsizing your premises, for example, moving into smaller, more cost-effective premises, or moving from, prime ground floor street front retail premises up into something on the first floor, for example, which would typically be much cheaper to rent. So you could be looking at moving your studio premises. You might be talking to your landlord, for example, about renegotiating the terms of your lease. If that lease is generally not viable for you, can you reduce the rent that you're paying? Sometimes landlords will be open to that because they want to keep a good long-term tenant, and it's more worth their while to reduce the rent a little for you than it is to have the property sitting vacant for a long period of time. But of course, the other option, which for many people will be more appealing, and if you're looking at wanting to grow and expand your business long term, it's possibly the better way to head, would be what can you do to actually increase your turnover? So there are a huge number of different strategies here, but effectively it comes down to, in most cases, a big part of that will be, can you boost up the number of clients coming in through the door, and can you hold on to more of those clients that come in the door? So can you engage in really good marketing practices to get extra clients in, and can you really do things that are going to help to improve the retention of your existing clients? So your numbers climb, your turnover climbs, and therefore your percentage of rent and outgoings becomes much lower as a result. So I hope that's been of some help to you. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them down below. If you did like this video, please help our channel grow. Click like on the video below and also subscribe so that you'll receive future updates on when I put new videos out. And I'll look forward to hopefully seeing you online again very, very soon. Thank you.